The narrow shafts which seem
Yeah.
to point at the sky coming out of these
Yeah.
pyramids. Have
Yeah.
you looked at that?
Yes, very much so. This is one of Robert Bauval's major discoveries. It was known right from a long, long time ago that from the King's Chamber there are two shafts that go right out through the side of the pyramid, right? And there's one on the northern side, and it's known for a long time that that one pointed at the North Star, which wasn't what we have as the North Star because of this wobbly motion.
Yeah.
Their North Star was a star called Thuban,
Right.
which is in the constellation of what we would now call Draco.
Right.
Yeah, but for them it was a hippopotamus goddess, Tuat, and that's where that star was located.
So are you basing this on an absolute year of
Yeah.
Are you saying, well, it was built in a particular year?
Within the middle of the third millennium
because
BC.
in order to know that, you need to know pretty much within
Well, it would
a
always
few
still be
hundred years.
pointing north, but it's a question of
Right.
what it's pointing at.
Right. Right. So because the point in time depends where it points, yes.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, what's in the sky at that point?
Yes. So you've based that, so you think you know when the pyramid was actually built to make that assumption?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, so carry on. So it's pointing at a different part of the sky to where it points now.
It's pointing at the north, but the star that was at the north, because of this wobbly thing, was a different star from what we have at the north. And our Polaris star at the north now won't be there for forever. It's going to move on, and there'll be other stars coming there. It goes in a circle.
Yeah.
But so that was known for a long time, right? In 1966, an astronomer, she was a junior astronomer then, she's now a professor of astronomy, a lady called Virginia Trimble, was in Cairo and knew an Egyptologist called Alexander Badawi, and he asked her if she could work out if there was anything significant that the southern shaft was pointing to, because there's the northern one pointing at the North Star and there's one opposite that points south. So she worked out that that would be the culmination point. Now, you have to understand that when stars rise in the east, then they reach their highest position in the sky in the south, and then they set, going to the west.
Yeah.
So all stars do this. They rise and they reach their highest position and they set, going round in a circle. What she worked out is that the angle that shaft was, at the time the pyramid was supposedly built, 2,500 roughly BC, that shaft would have pointed at the culmination point, the highest position of the belt of Orion. Right. So we got one shaft pointing at the North Star, and we got one pointing at the belt of Orion, which is pretty significant.
Right. But pointing at the North Star now, is it the other one? You said. Right.
Well, it was their North Star was Thuban,
a different North
pointing
Star.
at our North Star now because it's
right. I see.
the
So
movement.
Thuban and then right. Okay.
Yeah. Now, Robert Bauval, I said, he was very smart about this. There were there's another chamber lower down called the Queen's Chamber, right? So these shafts were from the King's Chamber, so called. I don't suppose the Egyptians called it that, but
no.
They're the upstairs ones. Then below that, lower down in the pyramid, you have the Queen's Chamber, and that also had two shafts.
Right.
But they don't go right through the pyramid, and nobody had bothered to work out whether they were pointing at anything.
Right.
So Robert Bauval, working with an astronomer, he was living in Australia at the time, an astronomer in Australia, got him to work out where the southern shaft from that chamber pointed, right? And he discovered that it pointed at the culmination point of the star Sirius at the same time as the other one would be pointing at the belt of Orion, as they move round.
Right.
So that was interesting because Orion is connected with Osiris, as I was saying. Sirius is connected with his wife Isis.
Right.
So he concluded that this chamber must be something to do with Isis, hence the Queen's Chamber.
Right.
And later on, he discovered that the northern shaft from that chamber pointed towards the lower position of a star called Kochab in the constellation of what we would call the Little Bear. Right? And that constellation represented the shape of it, a special tool the Egyptians had for opening the mouth. They would take the mummy and they would cut the bandages to open the mouth so he can breathe again. So it seemed like this chamber was to do with this whole ritual about Isis resurrecting Osiris, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the other one is to do with ascension.
Right.
Right? So this was totally novel. No one had ever worked this out before.
Right.
And he was genius to do this. Mm-hmm. So we now know that this pyramid is some kind of religious architecture tied up with the deepest mysteries of the ancient Egyptians about Isis and Osiris and the whole idea about birth and death and rebirth and ascension.
The nature of those shafts make one think that there's some sort of energy or beam either coming into it or pointing out of it towards those stars. But just let me bring in concept of another researcher who's also looked at the pyramids. I had a chap on a good few years ago now called Keith Hunter, and he alerted me to the work of Christopher Dunn, who I'm sure you've heard of.
I know Christopher Dunn, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go through a brief summary of his hypothesis on what the pyramid is. So he's an engineer. His book is called The Giza Power Plant, I think. So in the Grand Gallery, which you can't really walk up and down, it clearly wasn't made to walk in, he believed that contained resonators, which were used to convert earth energy into airborne sound energy. So the earth is believed to have a natural frequency of between 2 and 7 hertz. So there's some sort of energy that can be tapped into using what's called a coupled oscillator principle. So you've got this sound resonating up the Grand Gallery at a particular exact frequency. The Queen's Chamber, he believes, was used to mix a couple of different chemicals that were poured in via 2 of these shafts, perhaps the ones that actually don't connect to the outside world, which then, the purpose of which was to create hydrogen gas. That hydrogen gas is then fed into the what they call the King's Chamber, which is higher up, and with this resonating sound fed in there as well, that would then cause these massive granite blocks to physically resonate, and then energy could be used as an energy source. So that's, I'm probably not describing it in the same detail that Christopher Dunn would, but it's taking natural earth energy, converting them into sound, and then into physical movement energy of these massive granite blocks. Now part of that, I think, is energy coming in from one of the shafts into the King's Chamber of possibly, I don't know, microwave or some sort of electromagnetic energy that's required as well, all right, which might be coming from a star, who knows. So do you think that the two can be reconciled? Do you think, for example, that energy might have been needed to create the out-of-body experience that you're talking about?
Well, anything's possible. I mean, this is a theory, right?
Yeah.
And I have huge respect for Chris Dunn. I don't know so much about this part of his work, but he's done a lot of work on the way bowls have been hollowed out of solid granite, and how would they have done that with the primitive tools they're supposed to have had. So it's very clear to me that the Egyptians had technologies that we don't know about. Yeah. Right? That we've lost, either we've lost the technique, or they had things that we have now, but we have no evidence. We have not found the machinery.
Exactly, this is the intriguing thing. Clearly, they were using advanced techniques, which must have involved physical machines.
Yeah.
But somebody has been very careful to remove every evidence of all those machines.
Yeah, I mean, when you go in the Grand Gallery, it does look like it's part of a machine. And people have speculated that it was some kind of telescope before they finished off the layers of the pyramid above it, that would have been facing south and they could be using it for making observations. And I don't know, but I don't dispute that there are aspects of the pyramid that we don't understand, and that there could be some other function. I'm not so sure about this business of chemicals in the Queen's chamber and hydrogen gas floating upwards.
All right.
But, you know, we're all speculating, aren't we?
Right.
But to me, Beauval's thesis that this was religious architecture that mimicked the ideas of wanting to go to the stars after death, and they mimicked the whole process of how you do that with the opening of the mouth ceremony. And we didn't write this in the Orion Mystery, but my personal opinion is that the King's Chamber represents the weighing of the heart, the judgment, which you often see in Egyptian scrolls and depicted, where the soul of the person, the dead person, is brought in, and there's a balance there with a little jar that represents the heart of the person that's weighed against the feather of truth. And if it doesn't balance, then the person wasn't living a righteous life, and they get that heart gets gobbled up by a monster living at the North Pole, right? And probably he's going to reincarnate. And if he's been a good boy and he's done all the right stuff and he's lived according to the laws of Ma'at, then he's welcomed on and he's taken to the court of Osiris. And the god Thoth, or Taut, writes it all in his little book. He's the recorder of souls. So I think the King's Chamber, which is a double square, represents this judgment. You either got the North Shaft and you end up at the North Pole, right? Or you got the South Shaft, right time of day, you end up in the Belt of Orion. So it seems to me that it's symbolising this dichotomy of destinies, as it were.
Right. So do you actually think then, let's say that Pharaoh could project his soul out to one of these gates, where do you think it would end up then? Would it end up on another planet in another body, or
this is a very good question, because certainly the belief of the Egyptians was that Osiris came from somewhere else and was sent to Earth, and that ties in with the idea that there are other inhabited planets, and maybe some of them are more advanced than here. And if you're a good boy, they'll let you go to one of those. But it seems to me that where we are, this is more like a prison planet, that we're the bad boys, you know, that have rebelled and done terrible things. And we're going through the school of life repeatedly, learning the lessons, till eventually we change our ways and can graduate. And this brings me back to this Stargate thing, that I see the Stargates as being sort of time locks, time portals, that when the sun is positioned at the solstice at the gateway, right, that's kind of indicating that it's the right time. And in particular the year 2000, we had a special gathering of the planets at that time. If you remember, we ended up around that time of having the agents had 7 planets, which included the Sun and Moon. So you had the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. Didn't know about Uranus and Neptune. So those 7 planets were all gathered around Orion. There were 3 on one side and 4 on the other.
Right.
And that fits in with the description at the start of the Book of Revelation. I'm sorry, I'm jumping to a different tradition. I mean, we're talking about the Christian tradition, but the Christian tradition has actually taken an awful lot from Egypt. And in the beginning of that book, which is a very mystical, strange book, very weird book, but it starts off with a description of how John, the evangelist, who falls into a swoon and he sees this enormous figure, and things are shown to him, and he calls this figure the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. And it describes him as being robed and wearing a belt, and his face is burnished and shining like the sun in its strength. And then it also says that he's standing amidst the 7 candlesticks, which are the 7 planets. Now that to me is a description of Orion, which has a belt, the sun in its strength. The sun is at solstice is in its strength, and the 7 candlesticks are the 7 planets, gathered round him. And it also talks about how the stars are in his hand.
Right.
Well, they all pass over his hand at different times if it's the hand of Orion. So I see the alpha position as being at the bottom, and then it goes up to the omega position. This one comes down. It's like two lifts, you know.
Right.
And it reaches the omega position at the end of this period, and that's when the gates open. So I believe, and I might be totally wrong on this, maybe I'm a nutter, but I believe that there's certain times when it's possible for souls to graduate from here. Maybe some really top class Buddhas, and people can do it whatever the time. Yeah, maybe, you know, the really creme de la creme can make it through any time. But the majority of us, I think there are certain graduation times, and at the end of 13,000 years, and 13,000 years ago was the end of the last ice age, and according to many traditions, that was when Atlantis fell, around that time.
Right.
So we're at the next.
Right. And you also think that at that time of change, what you would say are demonic forces can come in, or evil forces, or souls, they can come in as well.
Yeah.
So
it's a testing time. Yeah.
Yeah. You think that a lot of what's going on in the world today could be as a result of that.
Yeah.
That there's more negativity.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's difficult because when you look at the media, you're just getting a cherry-picked version of the world. 99.99% of the world is completely peaceful.
Yes, but you can see if you watch your television just how violent it's becoming. You know, we used to have cops and robbers series, but now you get horrible torture pictures and terrible things being shown to you. I'm not talking about the news. I'm talking about drama.
Yes.
We get pornography on an extraordinary scale.
Yeah.
And it's all temptations and corruption
that
are lowering our vibrational level. Yeah. And I see that as being these demonic forces, if you like, trying to pull us back down. The other forces are trying to pull us up to get into a higher level of vibration where we can leave this planet and move on to maybe Orion. Maybe it's some other place we go that can carry on in that place.
Let me just ask you again about the construction, because we were talking about this last night. And if you take the most advanced pyramids, you would expect, because the engineering is so good and just so phenomenal, that where have they built up that skill? Where's the one that they built before it that wasn't quite as good? Where's the testing of certain things or techniques with the engineering that they've had in there? It's not there. So that suggests that the knowledge has come from not that place, doesn't it? So and you made a comment. You said, well, it must have either been someone else, or it's come through well, you explain it.
Well, either we're talking about ET coming here, and little green men coming out, or maybe they're tall blonde people, coming out and showing the sort of primitive earthlings how to build a pyramid for whatever reason. Or you might have kind of maybe it's the pharaoh, maybe it's a high priest who's kind of shamanic and can tune in and be instructed mentally. You must do this, that, the other. And that's a bit like in the Bible with Moses, he goes up on the mountain and he comes back with his 10 Commandments. He's tuned in or something.
And you made the comparison with America and its skyscrapers. Just draw that analogy.
Well, I was pointing out that if you went to America and you went to New York and you saw these skyscrapers, and then a historian, archaeologist came up to you and said, well, in the last 200 years, we progressed from living in teepees and hunting buffaloes. We progressed, and we're now building these skyscrapers. You say, well, come off it. The Red Indians were living in the teepees. They're not the same guys who built the skyscrapers. That was an imported influence that came from Europe.
And farther east as well.
And further east. So, you've had an imported civilization superimposed on this agricultural Plains Indians culture that's led to this. So it could be that when we look at the pyramids, we're looking at the skyscrapers that somebody else has brought the technology and the ideas.
Yes, which brings us on to candidates for that. If it was a physical place, you believe in the Atlantis myths?
Yes, I do. I've written about this in a couple of my books. We have this ancient tradition about Atlantis and this civilization that once existed in the Atlantic, named after Atlantis. And I believe that was a real thing, and it was in the Bahamas. That's my belief. And that remnants, the people, it was obviously a maritime empire that they had, which spread to Africa and parts of Europe. And some cataclysm happened, something happened that caused the continent of Atlantis, as it were, to sink, right, to retreat under the waves. So what we see as the Bahamas and the West Indies now, perhaps just the mountain peaks of something that was much larger at one time, that was a continent. And survivors from that, there would have been colonies that they had elsewhere in Egypt and North Africa and Europe, but also in Mexico and South America maybe, that carried on.
Right.
So some of what we see, particularly with the early cultures there, I think are to do with Atlantis, that there was some knowledge being preserved and passed on.
You're talking about Maine and South American stuff as well. Because their pyramids seem to be different. They're usually more stepped, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
So do you know, because you've written a book about Mayan prophecies, is it?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? So why are those pyramids different shape?
Well, I mean, they have a different purpose. I mean, the main purpose of a pyramid, of one of those step pyramids, is for carrying out ceremonies that everyone can see. So you build this pyramid, and then you can stand up there on the top with it dressed in feathers and wonderful robes and so on, and you can do your stuff, which unfortunately very often involved slaying victims and pulling their hearts out or whatever. And everybody else can be down in the plaza below looking up, watching. So it's a kind of stand, like a stage, really. Whereas something like the Egyptian pyramids, it seems to be more kind of a secretive thing going on inside. Although I also think the Egyptian pyramids were built as a constant reminder that if people knew these represent the stars of Orion and that's where heaven is, anywhere you went, for miles around, you can see these things. You're working in the fields, tilling away. Oh, I'm fed up with this, I think I'll skive off. And then you look around and, the pyramids, of course that represents Orion, and that's where I really want to go.
Right.
I better work harder and do my stuff.
So you think the remnants in the Americas and what's in Egypt had the same source possibly in Atlantis?
Well, they had also, this is another very interesting thing, that the Mayan culture, now that we're able to translate the hieroglyphs, and that's been a huge breakthrough at the end of the last century. Really, from the 1970s is when it really began. Before that, people just couldn't read the Mayan hieroglyphs, except a few numbers. They can work out numbers. Now they've worked out that it's a phonetic system, and they're able to translate these. And there's vast numbers of these hieroglyphs.
Right.
And they tell us, again, that they believe that the three lower stars of Orion, the lowest one in the belt, Alnitak, and then there's a star called Siph and another one called Rigel, which form a triangle. They call those the foundation stones, right? And of the hearth in heaven. And in the middle of the hearth in heaven, what we would call the sword, they saw that as being the fire with the smoke coming out. And that's where first father came from, who's the corn god in the Mayan tradition.
Right.
So the corn god comes from there, going like Osiris, right? Osiris is associated with wheat. This guy's associated with sweet corn, maize. And he teaches them how to live properly and does all the right stuff. But he gets murdered by the underworld gods and buried in a bull court. And I won't go into the full details, but eventually his son, he has a couple of sons, and they trick the underworld gods, and they resurrect their first father. He comes out of the back of a tortoise or turtle, and he ascends and he goes back to heaven, which is in Orion. So we've got the same, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. We've got the same cultural traditions in Egypt and in Mexico, and you've got to ask yourself, how come, you know? And again, maybe we're talking about a cultural transmission, maybe we're talking about the same bunch of ETs, maybe we're talking about people who meditated and tuned in, but it is a recurring theme.
So you mentioned there the rituals involving blood sacrifice and taking their heart out.
Yeah.
So I've heard this about Aztec. So what's your theory on that then? Why would they just rip someone's heart out?
Yeah. Basically, if you read the Popol Vuh, it tells us about how there was a time of destruction, and the people were shivering up on top of the mountain. You know, it was wet, it was cold, they had no fire, the fires had all gone out. And then one of the gods, a guy called Tohil, made a pact with them that he would give them fire, and in return they must offer him flesh from under here, right? And so they make a pact that they will do that. They will make sacrifice to him in return for him giving them the fire. So it seems like this is actually a pact with the devil, that they thenceforth they feel honor bound to sacrifice people to this god, in order to perpetuate their civilization. They're terrified the sun's going to stop moving. And this is kind of what they have to do. And this is true in the Mayan culture, the Popol Vuh is Mayan, but also in the Aztec, slightly different variants. But this is the idea, is that mankind's been saved because we made this pact with this guy, this god, who's looking after us. He's our tutelary god. And of course, when the Spanish arrived, they discovered, I mean, there was a big temple a big pyramid in what's Mexico City now, Tenochtitlan it was called in those days. And to consecrate this pyramid, they slaughtered 2,000 people. Can you imagine that? You know, this blood sacrifice thing had got totally out of hand. Well, I don't know if you believe in what I'm saying now, but there are demonic forces around, and they feed off blood. They feed off suffering.
Right, yeah.
So you can imagine them gathering like flies around this place.
So it's a non-physical entity. You can't see it.
Yes.
And you think that when someone goes through extreme trauma or what have you, that something else can feed off that.
Especially something like a heart sacrifice, where the blood is flowing openly and it's releasing a lot of energy. Yeah. And they're able to, like vampires drink off this.
But there's also the possibility that they physically drank the blood as well.
Well, the vibrations in the blood. Right. So when blood is spilt, it releases energy. Right. So, and this is another reason why we have wars, that they stir up things to get people to slaughter. I mean, I dread to think what was happening in the Battle of the Somme. The amount of blood that's being shed there and the energy that must be released. These things feasting off them. So these are again problems that we have on this planet.
What would you say to hard scientific people who say, well, where's your evidence for an entity that we can't see feeding off something like that? What would you say to that?
I would say, well, study the matter.
Right.
Yes, maybe you can't see it physically, but you can feel it. You can sense it, and if you can't sense it, well then, you're probably one of them.
So why would they want to give that to these entities?
Because these entities would then work with them. This is the whole thing, of making a pact.
Right.
So they would help them to get victory, help them to terrify other people, help them to have good harvests, all this kind of thing. It's making a pact with these spirits. And a lot of religion is about that. It's about my local tribal god, and he wants me to cut off my foreskin, and then he's going to look after me as long as I do what he says.
Yeah.
And your god's not as good as my god. My god can kick the arse of your god.
Right.
This is what a lot of ancient literature is telling us.
Right. But is it all just in the mind, though, Adrian? Is it all just psychology, or do you think there is actually...
Well, it is in the mind, but it's in the collective mind. I mean, take something like Isis, right? And I don't mean the goddess. I mean the regime in Syria.
We mentioned this in the previous interview.
I mean, how could people today, and many of them actually, it's brought up in Britain, some of them, or in France or wherever,
but
don these black costumes, take people and make them kneel down and physically cut their head off with a knife,
Right, well, let me come in there. Have you seen the clip of Putin saying that the ISIS fighters are all just mercenaries? They're all just getting money. They're all paid to go there to fight a war
I don't know about
with the
that.
intention of getting rid of Assad. So they're proxies fighting
Well,
a
he
war
might
for
say
the
that,
US.
but I don't believe that. I think
So you think that they're doing it because they believe in their
religion?
religion?
It's a pathology that's being expressed, and it's...
I'm not saying that doesn't happen in the world.
No, but I think these people are demonically possessed to do these things. Like Hitler. Hitler, he wasn't just this rather silly little man with a silly little moustache, making big speeches. He was a vehicle for something much bigger than him, that was controlling a whole nation.
Yeah.
And these things happen in history.
So what about the current situation with America, and what do you think of? Do you think Trump's got a demon on his back, or do you think he's just a useful idiot? Or?
I don't know. I don't think he's got a demon on his back, but I think there is a plan being worked out there. But I keep out of politics. I mean, I don't watch the news. I don't have anything to do with current affairs programs. I try to avoid the really nasty TV series with all the blood and gore.
Yeah.
I'd enjoy, the sort of odd murder mystery and things like that as well. But, I think we have to be careful about what we expose ourselves to, because there is this pull trying to pull us down into low vibration, into the gutter. That's why they call it the gutter press, trying to pull us into the gutter. And as the other side, trying to pull us upwards.
Right.
We need to tune in on that, which is all to do with love and hope and knowledge and getting back to where we should be.
Sure. Before we finish, Adrian, I just wanted to ask you if you have an opinion on the Bosnian pyramids.
Yeah.
Have you looked at that?
I've not been there,
right?
But from what I've seen on TV and so on, they look fake to me.
Really? So
I tend to think that somebody's exploiting our interest in pyramids.
So what, you think that they're natural, or do you think
they're natural? Yeah.
Right. So it just so happened to be in the shape of a pyramid. These hills.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
They're not really the shape of a pyramid, even though, are they?
Well, I haven't looked at it either.
People are digging into the side of these,
and
I look on in horror when I see the digging in, and it's just piles of mud.
Right.
And the guy's digging away there, and all he's got is sort of wooden props to hold out the weight of all the... I think this guy's mad, this thing could collapse on his head any moment.
So, but have you watched any lectures of the because apparently it's a bit like the electric universe, which we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So this is a new theory of cosmology and physics, the electric universe, which challenges the orthodox accepted science. So the people will claim that the Bosnian pyramids is the same, that academia, they know they're real pyramids, but they don't want to acknowledge them, right? And there are a number of speakers who, well, I'm not qualified to judge. I've not spent enough time on it to form an opinion, but there appear to be speakers who are well versed, showing that these are artificial structures, although that they've got vegetation on them. That they're possibly even older than the Egyptian pyramids. I don't know, but you've
Well,
not.
I mean, from what I've seen,
Are you just right? So, what have you seen? Have you digged into it?
I haven't dug into it in
Right.
any depth because from what I've seen, they look to me like fakes. But
Right.
you know,
Well,
I
hang on, you
can, I
can't use the
can
word-
be wrong.
You mean naturally occurring hills?
Yes, yes, yes.
You don't mean fakes as in they've been pretend.
Well,
someone's
no, but the people are digging into them and creating shafts and chambers and things inside,
Right.
which
Alright.
weren't there. You know, they say, oh no, we're excavating it. You know.
Can I put your email address on the screen so anyone who wants to challenge you on the Bosnian pyramids?
If you want.
Yeah, because I don't know,
Yeah.
but I do get a lot of emails from people
Yes.
wanting me to cover the Bosnian
I
pyramids.
mean, if you asked me about the Chinese pyramids, that sounds a lot more interesting
Okay,
because we know that those are the tombs of the first emperor, for example.
right,
And it sounds to me like some very interesting stuff there. But the Chinese are so scared of a curse that if they dared tamper with his pyramid, that
Right.
you know, they're not going to touch it.
right. Okay,
I don't blame them.
right. Okay, is there anything else you want to cover?
No, I think we've covered this subject very well.
All right, okay, Adrian, that was fascinating, and any correspondence I'll pass it on if it's relevant. Okay.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right. Remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.